And I am here today with returning guest who shares the same last name as myself, Mr. Frank Burton. It's so good to have you on the show as always. I think we do this pretty much every year. It's like a yearly thing, which does coincide with the fact that you made I think when we sort of, around the time we first met, you made the decision that you wanted to release a book every year. So it's not some sort of weird mystery of the world. You specifically have planned to do this, which is quite entertaining. But before we delve into the next of the Ragbag universe book, there's another podcast that you spoke about. We're going to be talking about Brollywood, but people have probably read that in the title. But before that, in the episodes of Brollywood, because I listen to it obviously on your podcast feed in the episodic format. In that, you did mention that there was another podcast that you did that wasn't Ragbag, that wasn't I Like the Sound, and obviously I recently appeared on I Like the Sound. Thank you so much for that, sir. It's been in my show notes for a little while of all the guest spots and things. I keep trying to mention it, I remember. But I'll include a link in the description as well anyway, so people can listen, obviously, season 2. But you actually were talking about something else that you made. So I wondered if you could just talk to us a little bit about the other project that was like a mini series of podcasts, because I think that people would be quite interested to hear it.
Yeah, well, there is a band who your listeners may have heard of called Herman Dune, who I have been a fan of for 20 years. And David Ivar, who is the main sort of creative force behind the band, is just one of my absolute heroes. And I approached him a few years ago to interview him on the Ragbag podcast. And I ended up interviewing a couple of times on the Ragbag podcast and just talking about his kind of new releases that he had out at the time. And then about a year ago, he approached me and said, would you like to make this podcast series with me? And I've mentioned he's my hero, so it took me about 5 seconds to say yes. And he's such a great guy, by the way, as well. I mean, I really love his songs. His approach to songwriting is so really personal, and really he always has kind of a different sort of angle on things. And just the way that he writes songs, it's all sort of is really one of a kind as far as I'm concerned. And he wanted to make this 4-part podcast series called Not on Top, the Herman Dune story. Not on Top is one of his early albums. That's the name of one of his one of the defining albums of his early period. And so we spent a good few hours in each other's company, and I sort of got to know him really well, and we've become friends really, and it's really great. It's a really nice sort of friendship that we've kind of formed for ourselves really, and we made this 4-part podcast series just about the history of his band. And I'd like to think it's kind of, if you've not heard his music before, it's a nice little kind of introduction to his music, and it's a good sort of way in to hear him talk about it. And he's very eloquent and very sort of thoughtful in all the questions that I asked him. He really sort of thought really deeply about sort of, and when we were working on what approach to take with the podcast series, he was very sort of like, we had a lot of discussions about kind of, how he's coming across, and I was kind of like coaching him in terms of, because he doesn't really like being interviewed very much, so it's kind of like I was kind of getting him to kind of be himself, and just come out as himself, because it's kind of easy when you're kind of in a band, I suppose, and you're being interviewed about stuff, just to give like a stock response to like the questions, and just sort of give your usual response to this sort of thing. But David he really kind of properly just like really thought about what he was saying, and it was just a really, really nice sort of series of conversations that we had. And it's a really great series, that I'm really pleased with it. So the Herman Dune podcast, I recommend it.
And it's funny because after I listened to Brollywood, I did have a little break from listening to your voice, because it was several hours of it.
Oh, you need it, won't you?
It wasn't just you; it's anything I listen to. I've got an Audible subscription, so and I got like a deal. I got like 12 months worth for like 40 quid or something. And it's basically, if anyone who hasn't used Audible, each month you get a credit, and a credit can be used for an audiobook, and they normally cost about 8 quid by themselves. And so I got them for half price, so I just got 12 audiobook vouchers just in one go. And so a lot of the listening I've been doing on that was Star Wars, unsurprisingly. So I've been listening to a lot of Star Wars Legends books and some canon books that I hadn't picked up or anything. And then I can I've got some Star Wars books I'm reading, some Star Wars comics I'm reading, and now Star Wars books I'm listening to. But in between that, I have to have breaks as well, because I can't just purely consume Star Wars. I have to have something else to talk about with people. So when I, after listening to Brollywood and things, I then had a break and I was listening to Star Wars stuff again, a couple of sort of easy to listen podcasts, because like as much as I enjoy Brollywood, it is an audiobook, so I have to pay attention to it. Like I've got a few podcasts I describe as shower podcasts, so I chuck them on when I'm in the shower, and it's normally friends of mine on Comics in Motion talking about, if it's discussion show on Andor or the new Star Wars show, or if it's just talking about a film that I've seen, and it's just a casual hour-long conversation where a couple of people are having a laugh about a film. I don't need to listen to every single word in that conversation. I just need to get the gist and pick up the pieces. But when it's an audiobook or one of the podcasts that's more serious, like shout out to my friend Tonya Todd, who did the Banned Books podcast. She did 7 episodes of that on books that have been banned. They're very important conversations. I can't just half listen to them. So ones like that in the audiobook I want to actually focus on. So I listen to when I'm doing, chores where I'm tuning out, like washing up or driving somewhere. But with Brollywood, I had a break from it, and then I went back and I was like, Frank kept mentioning Not on Top, and I have no idea who Herman Dune are. I've never heard of them. And I was like, I'm going to give that a go, because I'm intrigued. And even if it's not necessary to my taste, obviously you were saying in Brollywood how passionate you were about it and how you think it's one of the best things you've ever done. So I was like, I want to support Frank. I want to listen to it. And I would agree with what you said. Like, he is such an interesting guy. Like, being obviously the singer of a band, you get generally 2 personality types. You either get this is very broad general terms, of course, but it's either really eccentric and over the top and extroverted, and someone who's really, really willing to say anything about themselves because it's all about promotion. And then a lot of the time, you get the ones who are a lot more kind of introverted in certain ways, but they're just like I have to talk to all these people, as you say, I've got these stock answers. I don't want to promote my music. I want to create music I love, and then I would like for people to listen to it and ideally live off it. But I create music because I'm passionate about the music, not because it's, a money-making thing. And when you hear him talk about it, you can kind of hear him. He's like, there's almost, because you've said it, I can think retrospectively, it's almost like you can hear his degree of what would be a stock response, and then he catches himself and makes it more of a full tangent. So I think you as the interviewer and you as a friend of him is just, I keep saying him, is David Ivar, as you said, but because you've got that relationship, that kinship and things, I feel like it really does come out in the podcast. And me just listening to the first episode, I was like, I want to check out this band. So I listened to, saying before we press record, I listened to some of their music beforehand, and it's quite different and interesting. So do you find that, do you feel like almost all of your Ragbag interviews have kind of been a build up to your friendship with Herman Dune? Like, if nothing else happens in my life, I'm now mates with David Ivar of Herman Dune. I've released this cracking podcast.
Well, it's a nice thing. It's certainly a nice thing that's come out of it. And I wouldn't have been able to make that series if I hadn't made Ragbag first. Because, I would have just been completely at the deep end. And it was the original, the first time I interviewed David was for Ragbag years ago. And I was really nervous because I was meeting this guy who I really admire. He was kind of like a bit awkward because he doesn't like doing interviews. so we were kind of stumbling a bit, and then he was just asking me questions about myself, and he said, like, where are you? What city are you in? I said, I'm in Manchester, and his face just lit up, and he said, I love Manchester. And he started telling me these stories about being on tour and visiting Manchester and these kind of music shops he used to go to and stuff, and just kind of brought him out of himself, and that we just kind of clicked from that moment, really. And it's if I hadn't sort of had those sort of experiences of kind of because I did used to get, like, when I'm not kind of a natural interviewer like yourself.
Thank you.
I used to get quite nervous around it, particularly if it was somebody that I really liked, and there was a lot in it. It felt like there was a lot resting on it for me in those circumstances. And I didn't always know what to say. And I tried to avoid, like, the cliched sort of questions about, how did the band first get together and stuff like that? things that they've been asked like thousands of times before, try and sort of think of questions that like nobody's ever asked them before. And, so having had that experience, I think, of doing that show for a couple of years, and then sort of I was able to like properly approach that with David to do that 4-part series. So it's quite nice.
It's one of those, especially with musical artists, because of the ones I've spoken with, and it's the same with kind of the more famous someone gets, in essence, and obviously the more interviews they've done, the harder it is to interview them in a lot of ways. The easier it is if you're just on a TV show and you talk to them for 10 minutes. But if you're an indie podcaster or someone who's trying to actually get something out of the conversation rather than it just being a slot to fill, which obviously is how you and I feel. I don't have anyone on my show that I'm not, actively interested in, or they have something different to say. And obviously when Ragbag was more of the conversational style podcast, intertwined with the sort of story elements of it, but when you were focusing on the interviews specifically with musicians and etc., it is that thing, because I found that when I spoke to a couple of the High Republic authors, I was like, right, I got to listen to like 4 or 5 of their interviews, listen to the exact same questions that comes up, and obviously with people who are into Star Wars, the always questions people get is, who's your favourite Star Wars character? Who's your favourite Star Wars B-list character that no one's heard of? What's your favourite Star Wars film and why? And it blah, blah, blah. And by the time you ask these 10 questions about Star Wars, that you probably ask anyone who you've ever met in your life who says they like Star Wars. You meet a friend around the pub, you ask these same 10 questions. Or I do. But when that happens, it's like, the first half of the hour you've got has been used up by stock answers that someone else has already got. And they get a bit bored of it, because they're like, well, this is just like every other conversation I've ever had, And if you can think of things that are interesting, if you can think of things that they've not been asked before, you can immediately feel their shoulders loosen a little bit, and they're kind of, oh, I have to actually think about these things now. I can't just almost tune out. And I find that with yourself, you definitely did that with David Ivar.
That's good. Yeah. It's one of the things that just on a side note, one of the things that I like about being interviewed by you for my books is that you read them. Because one of the hardest things, speaking as an author, one of the hardest things when you're being interviewed by somebody, it's happened to me quite a few times, is that the interviewer hasn't read the book. Mm-hmm. So you have to explain to the interviewer what the book is about. Now, you've read Brollywood. It's a difficult book to explain. So I basically spend like pretty much the entirety of the interview trying to explain what the book is about. And by the time I've explained that, it's kind of the whole thing's over, and like they're still kind of, well, okay, so he is you, but he's not you. Yeah. Yeah, it's very confusing. Yeah.
It's one of those. I find whenever I have authors on, I get contacted by people's either agents or podcast promoters or things like that. I get a lot of authors, and if I didn't curate who comes on my show, it would be genuine book chat. Every single week would be an author. That's how many authors are trying to promote their stuff. And I'm like, some of their books sound really interesting, but I'm like, if the subject matter, if it's a fiction, if it's a non-fiction book and the subject matter is quite, ambiguous, like cancel culture, how Twitter's ruining the world. Although you should read the book before having someone on, if you have been approached by someone who's trying to get someone on your show and they're like, can they come in 2 weeks? It's like, well, I don't have time to read your book in 2 weeks. With something like that, I can read normally the media booklet they give, or you go on Amazon, you can read the first chapter or so. And normally I find if I can read the first chapter at least, that gives at least a vague idea of where the book's going to go, or what it's going to be about, as long as it's non-fiction. When it goes into fiction, I try to avoid doing that when I can, because I speak to a lot of authors and they always say, I don't like it. It's not fun talking to someone who's not read your book, because you basically have to kind of jitter around what you actually want to talk about. And you can't, when we are about to speak about Brollywood and things, there will be stuff that I'll mention that you and I and anyone who's read the book will understand, but people who haven't won't get. But listening to someone talk about it, it will still work in context. But if you've not read the book, there's only a finite amount of places you can actually go. And especially with the, let's call it surrealist writings of yours, some of those things, if we tried to talk about, what we did quite a while ago, The 100, which I still talk to people about today, because I just think there are so many ideas in that book that are so brilliant, that there's that one, which is the room when you go into, and there's loads of photo albums, it's every photo you've ever been in that is not a photo taken of you, you're in the background. Anytime I'm with a new person, and the photos get taken, I always mention that because I'm just like, this just such a genius idea. I was in Disneyland Paris a week or two ago with our friend, me and Megan went with our friend Kerry. And then, we were trying to avoid being in everyone's photos, either when we're at the Eiffel Tower or when we're at Disney, people taking photos of the castle. We're trying to avoid it. And then I mentioned, I was like, obviously Megan knows you by name, well, has met you, obviously. But before she met you as well, she knew of you because I speak about, obviously, podcasting and stuff quite a lot. And when I spoke to Kerry, I was like, a friend of mine, Frank Burton, he wrote a book and it's got this really cool idea. So I always bring up that idea, but I don't know how you would talk to anyone about the 100 if you haven't read it. Like, how do you talk about 100 short stories without spoiling what's in the stories, but just talk ambiguously about it? Surely that's like a 10-minute conversation.
It is, yeah. It was good. Fortunately, I didn't do that many interviews for 100. I did one. There's a great radio show in Manchester called Hannah's Bookshelf, and it's run by an author called Hannah Kate. Mm-hmm. And I went in and was interviewed by her, and I was all sort of ready. I was kind of thinking, like, how am I going to describe this book? Because it's so complicated. There's so many different characters, so many different ideas. I just had this whole spiel ready. And she started the interview by saying, this is Frank's book. I've read it. It's great. Oh, great. She's read it. Nice one. Oh. Now I don't have to spend half an hour explaining what it's about. That's great.
Well, I'll make a note of that because I'll get people to listen to that as well. Obviously, we had a full conversation about it, but that, your other books obviously are in the Ragbag world primarily. I know, like, the first book I think you released wasn't, but the recent books you've been releasing have been the Ragbag world. So they've been good as standalone books, but they also work when they're interconnected and work better. The more you read. But with 100, if anyone's listening and they haven't, obviously go back and listen to that episode. I'll put a link in the description. But check out the 100, the audiobook of it. Well, you can pick up the physical book, obviously, but the audiobook's how I listen to it. And you get lovely Frank doing all the narration and stuff. You get a few different voices, which is always a lot of fun. And it's just the purely, even if you don't want to listen to it for the narrative sense or because you don't want to support our good friend Frank here, just listen to it for the sheer amount of ideas, because there's so many cool ones that I just feel like you could almost write a book series almost on any short story just of some of the concepts. And I won't spoil it, but some of them, as you get further in the book and it kind of zooms out and out and out, some of them are mental. And so it's nice having that. And I think that in a way, you kind of got in a very good way, all the crazy ideas, or a lot of them out. And then you were kind of left with, right, here's some ideas that are a bit mad, but in urban myths can work. And that's where I found there's a lot of elements of urban myth that play quite strongly in the Ragbag Presents book series. And I really like that. And obviously when we spoke before, there was the conversation about, I can't remember what they were called. Oh, the people that were holding the Eiffel Tower hostage. With that idea, that was kind of a central part of the prior book. But in this one, it's about, well, what is Brollywood? That's kind of the big question in a sense. So I know that trying to explain your book to people who haven't read it is never the author's fun thing, because we just spoke about that. But as a jumping off point with Brollywood in itself, with where it fits into the Ragbag universe, this is is it the third book?
It's the third book, yeah. Yeah,
I forget sometimes because obviously the Ragbag show went on for so long that it was just like, which one was it? But yes, and also because they jump around time-wise a little bit too. It's like, okay, and I've got the idea of the next one you're writing as well, so it's a bit all over the place. But with Brollywood, was that always planned to be the third one? Was the concept behind it always going to be there? Like, what was the birthing method of this book and where it fell in the series?
It all sort of developed based on a number of different ideas. I want each of the books in the series to be focused mainly on one individual character. There's quite a lot of characters in the Brollywood novel, as it turns out, but kind of the original idea was that the central character was going to be Noddy, who is he was in the first book, and Frank met him when he was in prison. And he was shared a cell with him, and he's kind of this member of this mysterious sort of criminal fraternity that is very, very sort of, very secretive.
Trying not to spoil your own book. I can see the gears turning, like, Mike's read it, but I can't reveal too much.
Well, I'm just thinking how best to describe it, actually, yeah. So So yeah, Noddy was in the first book, and I said at the time that I was going to write a whole book. I was going to explain a lot about Noddy, where Noddy came from, what his origins were, and all that sort of thing. So that was the initial idea of having Noddy as the central character for Brollywood. And he kind of is, but there's a lot of other characters in this one as well. So it's quite a chaotic sort of tale, this one. It's centered around a bank heist, which is it involves various different fictionalized versions of sort of Hollywood actors, which is it's not something that I've done in any of the previous two books. I haven't done this sort of little trick of like fictionalizing real people. Well, I fictionalized myself because I'm kind of the main character in the book, but I haven't sort of done this thing where I use kind of fictionalized versions of public figures. And I'm not going to do it again because I don't think I'd be able to get away with it twice. But basically, the title of the book, Brollywood, refers to this bank, which is basically a secret society that is run by these sort of British sort of A-list Hollywood stars who wanted to form this little club for themselves as a kind of a getaway, like a place to get away from their the stresses of their real life. And so it pretends to be a bank, but it's not really a bank. But also that there's about £100 million in the vault of this bank because it is a real bank as well. And it's about how Frank accidentally gets kind of roped into robbing the place, and as you do. But I really wanted to write a bank heist story because I love them. I love that sort of thing where just kind of movies like Ocean's 11 and The Italian Job, and that sort of structures of those stories where you get like you see this team of people coming together and they plan this bank heist, and then you see the bank heist happen, and the bank heist inevitably doesn't go as according to plan, and chaos ensues and so on. It's always a great kind of thing. I've never done this sort of story before either, so I thought I want to try my hand at doing this, and that's what I've done. I've done a bank heist story.
Yeah, it's a really cool one as well, and obviously we're not going to spoil what happens in it or the who, what, when, where, why, apart from Frank Burton's in it. But it's a funny thing because I noticed that this, with what you've said there about it being sort of a degree of a kind of it's a secret area, a secret bank, the kind of thing. It's quite entertaining because in Everything I Am, obviously you played around with the idea of another secret thing. So is this going to become a theme in every other book? There's going to be like a secret club, or is this just this? For now, this is just the two secret clubs.
No. There's always the you use the expression urban myth, which I like, and that's there's a lot of urban myths in the Ragbag series. And I've kind of started off small. I mean, the first book is kind of centered around this secret flat that Frank's dad and his uncle and some of their friends have got. And but Brollywood is kind of like that, but it's, instead of it being run by some of Frank's relatives, it's being run by Benedict Cumberbatch and Anthony Hopkins and people of that caliber. So it's kind of a different scenario. I've kind of upscaled it, if you like. And it's just another kind of a urban myth, if you like. The second book is kind of has a similar sort of theme to it as well. And I'm writing the fourth book at the moment, which is kind of going to be about a cult. So you can see where this is going, can't you? It's there's a lot of these secret societies. I like these stories about secret societies, I guess.
I think that you're secretly in one. I think you are the Noddy. You are in this secret, beyond secret societies. It's beyond all of the air quotes known ones and all these urban myths. You come on the show and you go, no, that urban myth, I made that up for the book. No, I made that one up for the book. These are all real things, but what you're doing in this society is funneling all these things that really happened through Ragbag and pretending it's a version of you that's not actually you, all to make it seem like none of these things are real. You're double bluffing the nation. That's what you're doing with Ragbag, isn't it?
You got me. Yeah.
Is that going to be the last book of Ragbag? Is that going to be the actual? It's going to be like a full circle thing.
Well, yeah, I'll get back to you on that.
Oh, exciting stuff. How many, like vaguely, I know I always ask you this, but I'm always intrigued because the number always seems to grow whenever I talk to you about it. I know that generally speaking, when you're already, released and recorded the audio for one book, you're basically already starting to write the other book. And normally I find that you're promoting one book, you're writing the next one, but you've also normally got most of the following one kind of in broad strokes figured out in your head as well. Are you still continuing on the streak of trying to do a book a year, or are you going to start to rein it in a bit, or are you you doubling up?
Well, I've got a clear plan for the first time, actually, in terms of where the narrative is going to. I think it's going to be a series of 5.
Wow.
So they've working on the 4th one at the moment. The 5th one is going to be, So as I was saying, each of the books has got like a particular character at the center of it, and the 5th book is going to be all about Frank. And I'm trying to with each of the books that goes on, I'm trying to kind of get more and more kind of under the skin of that character and kind of reveal kind of more about him and about his kind of internal world, I guess. And I think once I get to the 5th book and I've kind of written with him as kind of the central character, I think that would be a good place to I'm not saying that would be the last book as such, but this series of 5 will be a complete set of things. I mean, I may do more after that, but the ending of what I've got planned is for the 5th book to have a really nice sort of satisfying payoff at the end of that. And that will kind of tie in with kind of bits of the other books as well. So that is the plan as we have it at the moment. It could change. Who knows?
It's always part of the fun. It's one of those as well with where, like I always say to people when they listen to this and things, obviously it's like, go check out the audiobook, because even if this is the first one you jump on, you've done it in a very clever way where you don't have to listen to them in order. You can just listen to them kind of as and when, and they all fit together. But obviously the later ones do to a degree reference the earlier ones, but more so, Frank Burton is saying, yeah, I wrote the book Everything I Am, or at this point in the story I was writing Everything I Am because this is a flashback of however many years ago. So I like that use that it is self-referencing without it being gratuitous. But obviously in this one you actually tackled a little thing that I don't know if many people know about this, but it's a little thing called COVID. The world kind of shut down for a few months, or in some places years, and future generations, I'm not sure. I'm very interested to see how that's going to be in the history books, and like when I eventually have kids, being able to tell them, yeah, there was like a year period where everything just stopped for a while and then just kind of went back, and everyone was, half the people were trying to gun-ho and jump back into it, the other half people were trying to retract. Very weird time, still is. But obviously, in this book, you made the decision to specifically talk about current events. And I know that because Everything I Am was primarily flashbacks, you put some flavor text in there, but that obviously comes from also the era more than anything. And so with this one, am I right in thinking this is basically the most connected to what's going on in the real world at the time? Like this connecting to COVID, I think, is probably the biggest clear connection as a timestamp in a way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I try and do that with each of the books, like kind of reference kind of things that are going on at the time. But I think because of what happened with COVID is that it's kind of a stronger element, and it had to be an integral part of the story. Whereas in previous books, kind of events that were happening in the news and stuff were just kind of happening in the background. Whereas what happened with COVID was literally everybody was affected by it. And if you're writing a book that's set during the year 2020, you have to acknowledge this, and you have to. But it really is an integral part of the story, because Frank, the character, lives in a van, and people when COVID hit, he wasn't able to live in a van anymore. So he has all of this sort of thing. He has to go and he has to find somewhere to live. So he moves in with this girl who he's kind of just met, and a complicated relationship there, and then he accidentally burns their house down, and then he ends up living with his uncle Claude, and then so there's this whole thing, and all the time he's having to adhere to all these guidelines and lockdowns and all that sort of thing. But also there's the fact that he's about to rob a bank in a bit, and they're trying to figure out how to rob this bank under COVID restrictions. So, and I very much wanted to just not forget about the fact that COVID was there, because I wanted to be really strict about it. And everybody in that book has to follow all of the guidelines. And if they break the guidelines, I'm going to point it out. I'm going to say that this guy took his mask off at this point. And, and that sort of thing, And one thing that really annoyed me actually about at the time, you remember during lockdown and stuff like that, all these kind of TV shows came out and stuff like that, and they would very, very sort of vaguely acknowledge the fact that, like, there'd be an extra in the background with a mask on, and everybody else would just carry on as normal. It just wasn't realistic at all. That they really just didn't want to acknowledge the COVID thing, because I guess I can see why, because it would just disrupt the story too much. And then, in a couple of years' time, it would just be like completely out of date. And, when you're watching these shows where everybody's wearing masks and stuff anyway. But for me, with Brollywood, I just wanted to make sure that all of the guidelines were followed, even when they're robbing the bank. And I had all the dates of and then the lockdown restrictions eased at this point, and that's why they were able to go in at this time. And then they had the second lockdown, all these kind of complicated things that I had to incorporate into the story. But they actually ended up dictating the story in a way, because the story starts when the kind of catalyst for the start of the story is the fact that Frank has nowhere to live. So he has to, because of COVID, he has to go and live in this house. And then because the restrictions ease, go on. But then the second, later on we get the second lockdown, and that kind of dictates part of the story as well. So yeah, it was kind of it was an interesting challenge. That one was, yeah. I mean, I was going to. I mean, it's a difficult thing to write about. I think the pandemic, particularly in a comedy. I mean, like, this is supposed to be a funny book. It's a comedy, it's.
And it is, to clarify. That's why I keep laughing when you mention things. So I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because I'm remembering funny things that happen in the book that I can't quite talk about.
And by its nature, I think it's intentionally, it's kind of like the funniest one. I've gone into kind of sillier sort of territory than I have in the previous books. And I just wanted it to be like a nice sort of light kind of funny book, and like something that's going to make people laugh. But then I've got this COVID thing, which is kind of like, but in a way, it works quite well, because the serious element of it, the serious stuff that is going on in the background, is a nice little sort of counterweight to this very, very silly story that I'm telling. So it kind of, because the silliness of the story, I'm kind of like, I was a bit apprehensive about it being as silly as it is, but I think that it's quite fortunate that we had COVID in a way, because it gives it that sort of grounding in reality in its own way. It makes it more part of the real world, because I think if it wasn't set during the pandemic, it'd just be a silly story about a bank heist. And it turns out that adding COVID into the mix was quite an interesting sort of element to it.
Especially with it coming out so soon as well, because I know that there is a certain content which we don't like. I know it gets referenced because of Benedict Cumberbatch being in the book, but it's like Marvel movies and stuff. Like they are made like a year or 2, 3 years before, sometimes 4 years before. Some of the obviously the writing gets taken place even earlier than that, but it's like when they're making a Marvel show from Marvel film rather, when they're like, right, let's make a movie, to we're finished now, full stop, it's out, the premiere's done, the press is done. That can be anywhere between, 2 years at a push. Really, it's like 5, 6, maybe even 7 or 8 years. Like, they've already got plans for the next, 10 years going on. So, obviously, the amount of work that takes when something happens major in a social sense. Obviously, I know the MCU is set in its own different universe. They don't really have to tackle things like COVID, but as more of an example of films and things, is that there's like a backlog. There's like, whenever something major happens in society, for about a year, whatever's released doesn't even mention it because of the scheduling of stuff. So it's quite refreshing when I was listening to this to hear it talking about COVID and stuff. And obviously, although most of the restrictions in the UK are gone, COVID is still clearly a thing. Like whenever me or Megan have got ill, the first question is, we need to take a COVID test. Let's make sure that we haven't got, it's not just a cold or, a bit of a flu or something. We need to make sure if it's not this bigger thing in a sense. So writing during COVID and about COVID, I did find it very refreshing as well because, you know, even though it is a very serious thing, and obviously there are people who died, people got very ill, and people are hugely, massively affected by it, lost their livelihood, etc. Acknowledging all of those things, but every element of human life, even tragedies, which I'm not saying COVID is or isn't a tragedy, but they all at least either have a funny side or at least have the capacity for a joke. Now, depending on how serious the thing is, depends on how good the joke has to be and the right timing and place. You know, I'm not going to go on here and talk about loads of 9/11 jokes, but like there are people who make those. But if you see the kind of comedian who would make that kind of joke, that's usually part and parcel with the kind of comedy. You don't want it to be the day after it happening, going to work and your boss telling one. There's a time and a place. And I think with this, the jokes in COVID are not making fun of anyone dying of COVID. That's not the joke. There's just there's little things, mainly about Uncle Claude, who, as you know, is my favourite character. And whenever he comes up, I absolutely crack up, if not for the voice alone. And it's just little things like I went over Uncle Claude's and he was wearing a mask while sat at the TV by himself. I don't think he needs to wear the mask. But is that sort of, I'm not saying it in the funny way you said it, but it's just that kind of thing of, I don't think he needs to wear the mask when he's by himself in a house with no one else. But that was the joke. It's just, he's just a slightly older gentleman who wants to be really careful, really follows the rules and almost doesn't want to get in trouble and also wants to look out for everyone. To such a degree, he's just sat there in shorts on his sofa, but in a mask, watching TV by himself. And is that the little bits of imagery and flavor text which make it so you're not being insensitive to the clear problematic crisis that's going on. And a lot of the things that happen in COVID you do mention them. You do mention some of the more serious things. Obviously, as you said, the catalyst for the show is that for the story is Frank having to move because of COVID. So I really like, although there is comedic elements, I want to specifically and explicitly say to the audience, you're not joking at COVID. You're making jokes while COVID is happening, which is life. And I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
It's one of those. It's just with this, it's so hard. Obviously, I love talking to you about these things, but a lot of the time what I want to talk about is all the juicy stuff. And obviously a lot of the juicy stuff is not the things I want to reveal on the podcast. But we'll talk about, you mentioned it slightly earlier, which is some of the celebrities that are in this. Because obviously, as you described, Brollywood and things, it's a club for celebrities. There's also a bank. So in that, you have a number of celebrities that come up. And obviously, I listen to the audiobook versions of these. And so I get to hear either some of your impressions of them, or with Benedict Cumberbatch, he came on the actual podcast and did it, which is amazing that you know Benedict Cumberbatch. It's incredible. And that he's appeared on Ragbag so many times and stuff. And that you let him write this book as well.
Yeah, I'm well connected. I'm a well connected guy, you know.
So with these celebrities adding in, obviously, Benedict was already connected to Ragbag from the podcast itself. But how did you feel about broaching the subject of celebrity? Because as you said, like you don't necessarily, you're not going to do it again. You couldn't get away with it twice. So how was it doing it your only time?
It was a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. Just sort of putting words in people's mouths and stuff like that. Just things getting Anthony Hopkins to say things that Anthony Hopkins would never say. It's just fun. It's just and one thing I'll mention at this point actually is that it's cool for us to talk about this because we're talking about this in context. While I'm doing sort of general publicity for the book. And kind of on the back cover of the book, and I've got a copy of it here. You can see, doesn't mention any of this stuff, and none of the stuff that I'm putting on social media mentions Benedict or mentions any of the other people who are in it. Like, I'm not going to talk about it because I think it's people are going to. Oh, there's a book about Benedict Cumberbatch. I'll buy that, and then. I don't want people to do that because I know that those people will be disappointed because they're expecting it to be some kind of Hollywood biography or something. And that's not what it is, you know. So I'm not going to, I just want these kind of appearances by these famous people to be like a surprise when people pick up the book and read it. Because like I say, there's nothing in the description on the cover that says that that's what it's about. There's a hint of it and the fact that it's got some like weird name that rhymes with Hollywood. Maybe they can figure it out. But yeah, but anyway, back to your question, which was the writing of the thing. Actually, the bit that I enjoyed the most is not an actor, but there's a whole section about Richard Branson, which I really enjoy writing. There's a story about Noddy. So for people who don't know the character, Noddy is basically this really elaborate con man who is able to impersonate whoever he wants to impersonate, and he says that he can basically study that person to an extent where he can pass himself off as that person, and it's all about capturing the person's essence. That's the expression that he uses. And Noddy has this story about this time that he impersonated Richard Branson and walked into the Virgin head offices and kind of defrauded them for like millions of pounds. And it was just, that was a fun sort of story, because I was kind of making fun of Richard Branson, which is a fun thing to do, because I think he's a slightly ridiculous man. And yeah, but with the other ones, I'm not kind of making fun of any of these other people. I was kind of making fun of Richard Branson because I think he's a sort of person that he's good to make fun of. But I'm not making fun of any of these real people, kind of Benedict Cumberbatch or Anthony Hopkins or any of these people. I've just kind of created these fictionalized versions of them. And my version of Benedict is slightly kind of this slightly sort of ridiculous man who kind of, he gets things muddled up, and he's a little bit sort of there's a little bit of this sort of stereotypical posh boy sort of about him, and he's a bit of a buffoon, but I'm pretty sure that the real Benedict Cumberbatch, I've never met the guy, I know that we were joking earlier that obviously I've never met the man myself. I don't really know anything about him either. So I've got no idea what he's like in real life. And I've just created this character who's quite, I'm not trying to make fun of Benedict Cumberbatch as a person. I've just created a character who's got the same name as him. And for me, it's just a fictional character. And like I say, I've done no research into this. I don't know what the real man is like, but it doesn't matter what the real man is like, because this is a fictional character. It's not the real person, And I'm just sort of having fun with these characters and sort of creating my own versions of them. And it's not, like I say, it's not done in any kind of malicious way. I've got this one character who I refer to as famous man who cannot be named for legal reasons, which and he's this really horrible character. He's a real arsehole, and I like that, but I haven't said who he is. So that's fine. I've just all the sort of horrible Hollywood stereotypes are embodied in this one character who's a cannibal as well. So. That's why I can't say what his name is. Famous man who cannot be named for legal reasons. He's a good one. He was a fun character to write. And actually, the funny thing is that I've created this character who I haven't said what his name is and all this sort of thing. Obviously, it's not a real person. I'm not sort of referring to anyone. It's not based on any real person. And shortly after I created this character, there was that guy who was a Hollywood actor who was accused of being a cannibal.
Armie Hammer, yeah.
I was like, what? I was joking, guys.
Oh, that is brilliant.
I literally thought it was the most ludicrous thing I could think of. I thought, let's go really off the deep end here, and let's just let's just make the guy a cannibal. I just think of the most horrible thing I can think of, and that's what he is. And a couple of months later, it came out that
it did. That's hilarious that you can't. It's like you write the most insane thing possible, think this will never happen. No one will think this, and then it literally happens months later. It's hilarious.
Yeah. And now people are going to read this book and think, "Oh, is it him? Is he talking about this?"
Well, they need to listen to the audiobook or the audio version, because your voice does not match what Armie Hammer sounds like.
No, this is an English. It's an English character. So and it is pointed out that all the Hollywood actors who are part of the Brollywood community are kind of the British actors, as it's based in Lincolnshire.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing as well with when you're using these celebrities, because there's certain funny things that you make certain ones do, which isn't mocking them as a person. But it's like Benedict Cumberbatch. One of the things I found the funniest was just the fact that people are like, "Oh my god, you're friends with Benedict Cumberbatch" in the book, and you're like, "Yep, he's just a mate. Like, I haven't even seen his movies." And they're like, "You haven't seen name this film? You haven't seen him as BBC Sherlock?" He's like, "What? No." And he like makes reference to it, and he's like, "Yeah, I played this great detective on TV," and you're like, "What are you talking about, Benedict? What?" I've only seen you in this one. Was it the radio drama you did? Or
yeah, it was on a radio sitcom years ago before it was famous.
Exactly.
It's a good show. It's called Cabin Pressure.
Yeah,
and it's I put that in because most people don't know what it is.
I'd never heard of it.
People who are familiar with it will it's just one of those things, that one of those little references that people who know it will go, "Oh, Cabin Pressure."
Exactly, and you're like, "That's the only thing I've seen you in." And it's like you mentioned about there's a point where he uses props, like he's got a box of props from Marvel, and you're like, "I did," and then Frank Burton's like, I don't even know what film he's doing," and it's like you as the author obviously know, everyone knows what Benedict Cumberbatch is, but it's very funny having this character who's so far removed from sort of the social zeitgeist, just of what's going on in the world right now. Obviously, he's basically driving around in a van, listening to music and doing his podcast, and he's somewhat content with that life. And so shares my mate Benedict. He comes on, he's a bit of he's a bit of an annoyance, actually. He's kind of a bothersome. Like, it's just someone being like, "Yeah, Benedict's all right, but he's just a normal guy." But he's just, and it's funny because apart from people like Leonardo DiCaprio or Johnny Depp, who are so unfathomably beyond comprehension famous, like I would, if I was in their positions, I'd find it so hard to know who I trust apart from people I knew before getting famous, because you're just like, everyone you talk to knows you're among the richest people on the entire planet. Benedict Cumberbatch, he's obviously going to be very wealthy, but he's not the level of DiCaprio or anything maybe yet. Maybe in years to come he will be. But people like that, they all, in theory, have friends who just know them as Benedict, as this, as that. And I know that there's certain movies and certain series that come out that do occasionally play on that, where certain comedians or whatever play versions of themselves. And there's a film, This Is the End, which was it was a lot better the first time I watched it, and then watching it again recently, it wasn't as funny as I remember it. But it's Seth Rogen and a lot of those people. It's James Franco as well, and Craig Robinson and people like that. And you've got all these people playing like cartoon versions of themselves, and it's funny and it works in the context of that movie, but that's the way you do it is just more subtle. It's just like, you could almost have quite a funny anthology like series or something. It'd have to be on some ridiculously expensive network, Amazon or something, where it's almost like extras, like Ricky Gervais's Extras, where you kind of have, you've got who this famous person is, but then you see behind the scenes they're nothing like you would think they'd be, in a sense. And I feel like it's kind of like that, but with a friend perspective. It's not mocking them. It's just Benedict probably has a mate who just sees him as Benedict. And that's just really funny, because I would love to know if they're getting little jabs in there. Like, if I had a friend who became super famous, I'd be like, "I've never seen anything you've been in. I've never listened to your music. I've never done that."
Yeah. No, it's a good comparison, that, but I think what I'm doing here is kind of different to what, like, the actors who are in Extras are on, like the actors who go on, like, Curb Your Enthusiasm and stuff, and like send themselves up. And what's happening in those shows is that the actors have agreed to do it, and whereas what I'm doing is I haven't consulted with any of these people at all. I'm just saying, yeah, this is what this person is like, and that's my take on the whole thing. And if they don't like it, then
more publicity.
Well, I guess so. Yeah. I do quite like the idea that someone is going to present these people with this book and say, have you seen what this guy's done? Maybe that'll happen. Maybe, well, I don't know. I don't really mind.
That's not why you did it, obviously. It's just one of those fun little a lot of elements of being able to have these famous or the celebrities in there and being able to do these things. But I did also find it funny when you said, The Man Who Cannot Be Named for Legal Reasons. Listening to you do the audiobook of that, you must have jumbled up that so many times, because there's the one main scene with him in, and you had to say it so many times. I had it almost in my head, and I was like, how is he... You must have messed it up, or just... It's almost like muscle memory at this point, where you're just like... And so, Man Who Cannot Be Named for Legal Reasons hits me with this, and then Man Who Cannot Be Named for Legal Reasons does this. And it's like you have to keep referring to him, because in certain parts that they're in, there's lots of people. So you can't just be like him and her. You have to keep naming him, which makes it even funnier that you have to keep saying.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's the repetition of it. I kind of said it a few more times than I needed to, just because I enjoyed the fact that I had to keep on saying this guy's name. And there are, because I'm not the sort of writer who kind of I don't give characters silly names, and like I don't kind of. Noddy is a bit of a silly name, but that's a nickname, you know. And but most of the characters have just got normal names. So when I've got a character with a silly name, I kind of like play around with that a bit, and that's what I did with the famous man who kind of been named. And another thing that I did was that just to kind of give you like a little insight into how these Hollywood actors relate to each other, I gave them. They've all got their own nicknames for each other. Like Benedict's nickname is Nigel and stuff like that. And I quite like that element of it, because it's sort of I think that's what they would do if they were in that situation. And I imagine that they do have their own names for each other that nobody really knows about, their own little private jokes and stuff like that, stuff that you don't really see or hear about. And it's just like any other workplace, you know. In any kind of workplace, you have these bits of banter and these kind of nicknames for each other and stuff like that. So I thought it'd be a nice way of humanizing those characters in a way, just to give them these sort of little bits of in jokes amongst themselves. So yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things I really enjoy about your books is it combines, as I said sort of earlier on, it combines the urban myth elements. You use that as a jumping off point or use it as a major plot point depending on the novel. So you use that, which I really like. So it gives a bit of, you know, an air of mystery, of intrigue, of something that's a little bit different. Because I think a lot of people with stories, most of the time, I think most of the time popular stories kind of fall into three categories. It's either realism, so it's like detective stories or dramas or things like that, up to where fiction works. You then get fantasy, but you've got the two kinds of fantasy. You get the fantasy, which is fantasy within our world, like things like Harry Potter or Narnia. You know, you're a normal person, you can get access to this crazy world that's going on that you don't know about. Or then you get sort of wild fantasy, which is Star Wars or Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, where it's like, there's no entering this universe for us normal people. This all fantasy universe exists, or you can kind of enter it, or it's real. And with yours, I really like that everything that happens in all of your books could happen. It's not like a giant logical leap. It's not like, you know, suddenly Benedict Cumberbatch comes down and shoots lasers out of his eyes, and that's how he got away. It's grounded in normal things, so you get the human level, but you've got just enough cool ideas and weirdness for even the characters in your own books are going like, I know how weird this sounds. This is a bit far-fetched. But obviously the characters in the books are saying, it did happen like this. I know no one's going to believe me. It makes no sense. And that's one of the other things I found about this book. You started doing a little bit more self-referencing of the kind of thing of, oh, yeah, I'm going to write a book about this. And people are like, well, no one would believe you anyway. And it's like, exactly. It's that sort of thing. I thought that was really clever, the meshing of the two worlds almost.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. It's a difficult trick to pull off this, I think, because like I said, the one rule that I have is that everything has to be. I can't have anything impossible happen. Mm-hmm. Everything has to be improbable, but not impossible. So, and that there has to be enough kind of proper reality. So I try and get as much sort of like real stuff about sort of day-to-day life and people's friendships and relationships and all that sort of thing going alongside. So it's not just crazy ideas; it's also kind of real life stuff going on at the same time. So yeah, it's. But I mean, admittedly, in this book, I've kind of gone kind of crazier than usual.
It's still not quite that bad. It's good crazy. It's leaning like this. Yeah. I never know which one's my favourite book of these, because obviously when I read or listened to the 100 and then compared that to Everything I Am, they were two such vastly different books. It was kind of hard to compare them. And now I've had more Ragbag. Like the Everything I Am, I think had the mystery around it that was the thing that drew me the most to book. But I found that, as you said earlier, this book was the funniest one. So I found myself like audibly laughing and then like, get my notepad, write that down, just so I could remember some of these sort of funnier moments and things. And then I think the second book, which his name has completely escaped me.
Getting Away with It.
Getting Away with It. That was it. The only things the main things I remember about the book are the endings and the spoilers. And it's like, I can't say that bit. I can't say that bit to remind him, because anyone who's listening who may not have checked it out. But yeah, Getting Away with It was really cool because it was the new character that's introduced, and it was the kind of relationship between Frank and this new character, and how he kind of develops with her. And I think one thing you do that's smart when you introduce these characters to Frank is that Frank is the through line, but as you say, each story focuses on one of the characters in his life that I think you haven't explicitly said this, but I assume is the subtext is these 5 or 4 characters that are going to be in these books are the ones that have made kind of the biggest impact on Frank's life, or at least there's been an event or something that has seriously changed kind of things about Frank. So I found with this one, it does have those elements, and you do get more backstory to Frank and more kind of what made him him. But I think that the humorous side of this and the connection to obviously COVID and the Equus real world, it felt like this was happening. I was like, in my mind when I was listening to this, I was like, I could visualize this just happening, just obviously where you up north more so, and just being like, I think. I may have said this on every podcast with you, so I'm sorry, but I think this is my favourite book of yours so far. I think that it's so tight and it's very punchy in the right ways, and it feels like you're really, not that you went with the other ones, but you really do feel like you're having fun with this one.
Yeah, it was a good laugh, really. Yeah, yeah.
It's even things like with the audiobook, one of the little things that I don't know if you did intentionally, but I think you probably did it retroactively, is when you're talking to Noddy and Noddy says he can kind of take the essence of people, and then there's that moment where it's like, Noddy's voice is exactly the same as mine. And it's like, Noddy's like, yeah, I've been doing that this whole time I've known you. And it's like, or was it that real life Frank, when he was doing the audiobook, was like, I should probably address this. Like, what was that? Am I overthinking that element, or is that because I just found that really funny?
No. Both of the answers are correct. I thought it would be. You are right that I have when I do the Noddy character, and in the first book when the Noddy character is talking, he just talks in Frank Burton's voice, because I didn't want to do a funny voice for each character, because that is just too challenging for me, and also it'd be probably annoying for the listener for me doing all these voices. So Noddy was just the same voice as me, like some of the characters are, but he was. And then I came up with this idea that Noddy was imitating Frank's voice, because the point is that Noddy doesn't have a natural speaking voice. He's always in character. So when he is sharing a prison cell with Frank, he's just talking in Frank's voice, because he doesn't have because we get into the whole backstory about how Noddy was kind of brought up, and he was brought up in this sort of very secluded environment, and he just started imitating all these voices that he heard on the radio, and then eventually he just sort of forgot what his real voice sounded like, because he was constantly in character. So he just didn't know how else to communicate. So that's kind of an interesting element to it. But yeah, it is kind of an in-joke that in the audiobook I use my voice for him. And then, so, yeah. You picked up on that nicely. Yeah.
It was just one of those little things when you said it, I was like, that was good. But it's also, like, I feel like we could talk about you could almost do a deep dive on this, which you basically did with your footnote section, which I found very funny, because about halfway through you just gave up, but you didn't give up in a way it was like audience won't get any contact. You just said, you're like, yeah, I'm about halfway through these, I'm recording these in my free time. I've obviously spent, hours recording the actual audiobook. That's all done. I obviously spent time writing the book and stuff. So I'm doing these footnote sections. You're like, last week I said I'm going to do cliche of the week. It's like, I can't really be bothered. So I'm just going to talk about something I'm like, that's interesting to me. And then you spoke about comments about service stations along the motorway and things, and people leaving reviews for like a McDonald's off the M274 or something, and it was just things like that. And it was quite funny because I started writing notes like, oh, footnote section, we're doing cliche of the week, we're doing this, and then At one point, you were just like, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. I can't be asked. And I was like, that for me is even funnier and more entertaining than you, because you were just like, yeah, I'm just going to read reviews. You were like, I found out like who leaves reviews for service stations. For, I don't know if Americans, if they call them the same things, but just driving on a motorway and every 50 or 100 miles or whatever, probably less than that, there's, fuel. And normally attached to those, they're started off as like, oh, have a little cafe. Oh, and then let's put McDonald's there. Oh, and let's put a W.H. Smith. And then eventually they become these quite big things where it's like a mini shopping mall that's actually not really a shopping mall you think anyone want to visit because it's ridiculously expensive and you can only get there by traveling in the motorway and there's nothing around it. But then the fact that people are reviewing them, and you read some of them out, and it's something like a great place to take the kids out. And you're like, you just go to like Fleet Services for the day with their kids. So I want to ask about the footnote section because I made a note of it, and it clearly shows the difference between the two Franks. But I also found that when obviously I've been listening to the audiobooks and things, obviously listen to Ragbag as well, and I like the sound, but like, listening to you by yourself with the footnote section, you just sound like you're having so much fun with it. And I felt like that key characteristic was the main difference, I think, between you and Ragbag Frank. Because Ragbag Frank is always, the only time he's really truly happy, it seems, is when he's listening to the right music or doing podcasty stuff, which obviously is very much true for the both of us. But then he's a bit of a pessimist. He doesn't really want to do a lot of stuff. He's just kind of gets swept up in something and he doesn't really necessarily say no, so he just kind of gets caught up in these crazy things that go on around him. But he's not like having fun with it necessarily, he's just kind of doing it. But then as soon as the click happens in the footnote section, you're just having a laugh about comments on the service station. I just really, really liked that. So I don't know if for your next one you're planning on not doing it because it was too much of a ball ache, but I personally really did enjoy them. I thought they were a lot of fun.
Oh, good. Thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, just to kind of make it clear what the footnote section is. So, like the serialized version of Brollywood, which is on the Ragbag Presents podcast, I've serialized the book in 10 parts, and I've got after the theme song finishes, I've got this bonus content. I call it the footnote section, and it's just me talking off the top of my head, but also kind of reference. The original idea was that I was going to like pull out all the kind of cultural references in the book and expand upon them a little bit. And then, as Mike says, I just got bored with that idea and then just decided to talk about things that interest me. And just so happens that people reviewing service stations on the M25 interests me quite a lot. It actually is quite a hobby of mine, just reading sort of random stuff on the internet. I don't know about you, but it's just random sort of reviews of stuff. And just the weird things that people say. I could make a whole book about that,
It would probably. I imagine there probably is a book already called Weird Reviews or something. Like there does.
yeah, there probably is. Yeah. It's just a fun little pastime of mine.
Yeah,
I do talk about other things as well, but that's one of the things. Yeah.
I was going to say, although I was having a laugh about that is only on one of the footnotes. And the first, I think 3 or 4 footnotes, you do really try hard to give a lot of information, a lot of the references. And there were certain things in there that I can't remember off the top of my head, but there were a couple of things you mentioned. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And oh, that's actually a really cool reference. But I think that as you get towards the end of the book, especially, with the footnotes, you've just spent ages writing the book, then sorting out the audio for the book, and now doing the footnote section for the book. But the last sort of 3 or 4 episodes, I'd say, because I've written little vague descriptions of them, which I can't show to the camera because it would spoil the whole book. But the last 3 or so, there's not as much, in a sense, you can say, or the last 4. Obviously, the finale footnotes, you then give a lot more context on certain elements of things because things have now kind of wrapped up and finished. But there's just the second half is just like, well, a lot of the references have already been made are still happening. Like that wasn't just a one-off reference. This is actually a key part of the story. And I can't really say the same things I did. So I would say to people, if they listen to the serialized version of it, that the footnotes are really worth listening to. If for the first few episodes you just are like, yeah, I want to hear more about Ragbag, then yeah, that's a great way. And then, yeah, you get a few episodes where it is about sillier things, but you do still bring yourself back. So did you like doing the footnotes? Are you planning on doing them again? Because obviously you've released it.
It's good fun, yeah. I think, because when I bring out the next one next year, I'll do the same thing again. I'll serialize it and I'll do some kind of random talking bits at the end. It was good. It was good fun. It was literally just me in an empty room talking. to myself, in effect, just sort of, making myself laugh and just thinking of different ideas off the top of my head. And it was quite nice. It was just like having a conversation with no one. Sometimes that's, you don't get interrupted, do you? It's quite nice.
Well, it's funny as well because, like, linking in with something you said earlier, which I forgot to jump on, was with Richard Branson. Is in the footnote section, you after you do the bit about Richard Branson in I believe it's episode 3, and then in the footnotes you talk about you doing the Richard Branson stuff. You did say one of the things was just Richard Branson not being a man of the people. And, we're not here to talk about politics in depth or anything like that, but it is quite funny that you make the very good point, which is like, he comes off trying to say he's a man of the people, yet he's one of the only people on the planet who's rich enough to own his own island. It's like, you can't really be more far removed from the people if you literally could have your own island. Which I just found that very entertaining.
Yeah, I know. It's not the only billionaire to do this, as we know.
There's more
one of them became the president of the USA. And,
yes.
So one of them bought Twitter because he's trying to be one of the. It's just, they've all got that element to them, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of the things I've critiqued about certain podcasters as well. Like, I've been open. I used to listen to Joe Rogan quite a lot. He's one of him and Scroobius Pip were the two reasons I got into podcasting, as in started listening and then decided I could make my own. And then, less so as Scroobius Pip, although it's starting to happen, is I'm starting to find that there's so many celebrity podcasters and they're trying to talk about real life, but you don't have a real life. You are a millionaire probably. You have several houses potentially, and you're talking about acting or doing stand-up comedy or, oh yeah, I went to this really cool show. It's like, yeah, but that was an exclusive, expensive show. You went to this cool, exclusive steakhouse in this state. The steakhouse costs like $500 to go to. And it becomes this thing I did find with Rogan quite a lot, that he was talking about the same 5 things constantly and I was just getting bored of it. But also him and all his other comedian friends were all talking about how great it is being a comedian. It's like, I'm sat here in traffic to my job that I would ideally not wanting, if I wasn't getting paid for my job, I wouldn't be doing it. I'm doing it because I have to. I want to spend my time dicking about and doing podcasting and chatting with my mates. I'd love that, but we can't all have that life. And then just going, oh yeah, it's so great being a comedian. Oh, it's so fucking good, isn't it? Yes. It's like, okay, I don't need to listen to you wank off all your friends just talking about how great your lives are. Thank you. And I found with celebrities, it was starting to become that. And I was just like, can't connect with you on a human level anymore. You're talking to people who are all incredibly rich as well. You have even though you talk about real life normal things, like going to the toilet or keeping a partner happy, the dynamic is completely different. Although not saying that famous and rich people don't have problems, they obviously do. But I think the way you kind of somewhat put it in this book without basically without shitting on them, without shitting on these celebrities, is that kind of thing where it's like, they do have problems, and we shouldn't say they don't have any problems, but their problems are quite different from us normal person. None of them are thinking, oh no, what happens now if I can't go to my job for 2 weeks? It's not, am I going to feed my child? It's like, oh, maybe I'll just write a book, or maybe I'll just start a podcast in COVID like every celebrity did. I'm not acting much. Let's start a podcast that immediately becomes more popular than 95% of all other podcasts, and I talk about nothing. And my sponsorship money alone is probably what these other podcasters make at their day jobs in a year. So, as you can hear, I'm quite jaded about Richard Branson and his island.
Well, I mean, I do think that, fame and fortune doesn't bring happiness. I know that's a cliche, but it is true. I mean, a lot of rich and famous people are miserable and bitter. And, I met, when I was working at the BBC, I met quite a few famous people, and a lot of them are really sort of really unhappy. You can just tell from just talking to them. They're unhappy about the way that their career's gone, and they're unhappy about the way that they get treated by other celebrities and all this sort of thing, and it's just, I really am quite glad that I'm not part of that world, to be honest. It doesn't seem like, from my limited experience and from the people I've met who are in that world, it doesn't seem like a fun place to be. It feels like quite a frustrating, and there's there's nice things that go with it. I mean, the money's quite good, but it's it's not the case for everybody. I mean, there's some very well-adjusted famous people, and there's some famous people who I've met who are really nice.
Oh yeah,
and it's just they're just people at the end of the day. It's just that people are people. It just reminded me of what you were saying about Joe Rogan, because it just sort of contrasts nicely with the book that I just read. I just read Jarvis Cocker's autobiography, which is called Good Pop, Bad Pop. And I actually didn't read it. I listened to the audiobook, which I highly recommend. It's Jarvis reading it himself, and it's got all these sound effects and stuff in it. And it's just kind of it's the opposite of all the kind of rock biography cliches of these kind of rock stars being self-aggrandizing and kind of mythologizing their own story, and just false modesty and this sort of thing. Just everything in Jarvis Cocker's book is just brilliant, and he's such kind of a down-to-earth guy. He seems that way anyway. I've not met him. I don't know that much about him personally, but like he just seems like a really kind of down-to-earth and just like a normal person. I know he was like hugely successful in the 90s, and he must have made a lot of money and done really well off the back of it. But yeah, he's that's a book that I recommend.
Well, I've made a note of it. I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, it's one that I always want to clarify. I don't want to seem like I'm just attacking people who are richer than me for being rich. That's not in any way. There are lots of people I do admire who have a lot more money than me, including some friends of mine. But it's also, I just think the way that that Brollywood kind of tackles fame and famous people and things, I just think it does it so tastefully and so well, and I really appreciate that. And as you say, like with fame, I remember when I was a teenager in college, me and my friend Reese, who was on the first episode of the podcast and the 100th episode and one or two others, me and him did a YouTube show for a while. I mean, what would happen if we got famous? Wouldn't that be cool? And it was around the time where all these YouTubers are starting to really make it. And we had an idea for a Minecraft podcast, a Minecraft YouTube channel before most people were actually doing it. And then we end up not doing it. And then we're like, if we'd have done that, we might have got on the train to fame and fortune. But I've thought that if I had done that when I was 16 to 18, I would be such a dick. Like, I think about how I was then and how I am now. And I'm like, even now I do things that are obviously very dickish. And I'm like, I shouldn't really be doing that. But I never do anything that I have like a seriously massive either regret or like thinking, what have I done? I like to think I've got a fairly grounded perspective in my life, even if I do say the odd stupid thing in an argument or something. But I'm like, I wouldn't have been grounded. I wouldn't have been knocked down in the right ways if I had of kind of got what I want at that age. And it's kind of that thing, isn't it, where I've thought of it in my life a lot of, wouldn't it be great to be famous? Wouldn't it be amazing if the podcast blew up and I became like Rogan famous? And I'm like, actually, that would suck quite hard, I think. I wouldn't want that level. I think for me, I just kind of want enough. I'd want enough money from the podcast where I could just do it as my living. I think that's a nice, even thing. And I think if I could choose that almost over being Rogan famous, I probably now would. I think maybe even when I started podcasting 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't. But I just think that there is a level of growth that one gets from having to do stuff you don't want to do so that you can enjoy the finer things, but also keeping yourself grounded. So I want to remind you of that, Frank, when the fifth book comes out and then you're actually real friends with Benedict Cumberbatch, because I want you to remember. Is there any sort of... I'm looking at my notes and things, and there's lots of funny things I can mention. Like, I really appreciate your Scottish accent, but I like that your comment there saying that it's a good Scottish accent as long as no Scottish people are around. I thought that was quite clever.
Generic Scottish accent, and I apologise to the Scots for doing it, but I was pretending to be Marty Pellow at the time. So, what can I say? It was in the book. I had to do it.
It's funny though, because it's you. It's a fictional version of you trying to play a fictional version of someone who is, it's as you kind of tack on the book, he's not a celebrity, it's not necessarily a household name, but then when you say Wet, 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 then a larger amount of people know, and then when you say the kind of main singles, people are like, oh, that band. So it's a clever niche, but because you reference about your own accent in it, I think it works really well as a person who's not Scottish.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I used to, where that came from was that I used to have a friend who used to always go on about the fact that he thought that I looked like Marty Pellow, He's the only person who's ever said it, but he used to say it every time he met me. And so it kind of got into my head that, it was like, just like Marty Pello, you do. So that's why I chose that particular character.
Yeah. And also there's, we'll start to wrap up here, but I know I keep bringing up urban myths, but because I keep looking at my notes and thinking about how many brilliant things you've got, and I won't specifically say what these are, but like the hula hoop principle, brilliant idea. The man who lives in Buckingham Palace, that's a cool, interesting idea that could, in theory, happen. And there's all these threads of things that I know you said in our last conversation that you don't put things in stories unless there's a reason for it. You don't just put random details just to, confuse the reader or kind of make people think it's going one way and go the other way, subvert expectations. But I just really like that whenever I read this, I feel the hula hoop principle is a very clever theory. Did you come up with that? Or is that an actual real thing?
No, that was my idea that I had, and I put it in the book because I thought it was quite cool.
Yeah, it is really good. And I would say to people, if you want to hear what that is, and it's very clever, it's only in episode 1. So it's a good taster for what's to come in Brollywood. If you listen to the serialized version of it, obviously you can buy the book as well, which I would recommend. I keep talking about the audiobook, so I'm doing terrible for your book sales.
That's fine.
Good for your...
You can consume the story in whatever way you like.
And I just love hearing your voice. And I mean, I will be honest, it's Uncle Claude. Whenever he gets mentioned, I just...
Uncle Claude, yeah, he's a very good character. As a matter of fact, I think I've brought this up multiple times, but I've actually done it now. And it's coming out next year. I have fully recorded a 6-part podcast series called Frank and Claude Are Following You.
Oh my God!
It's a situation comedy. It's the kind of a fake documentary, basically, about Frank and Claude driving around in the van together and the adventures that they have. And it's really great. I'm really looking forward to getting it out. I'm still editing the thing because it's but the thing with me and Claude, obviously it's me doing both of the voices, and I'm trying to make it sound like a real documentary. And so I'm trying to make all these conversations sound like real conversations, and I'm putting all these sound effects in to make it sound like we're in these kind of different situations, driving around in the van and ended up in all these different places. And yeah, I'm actually quite pleased with it. It actually sounds quite good. And I look forward to inflicting that upon people such as yourself.
I'm going to listen to it, and I'm going to do a podcast with you about it just so I can talk to you about how much I love Uncle Claude. Anytime I hear his voice, it kills me. But is there anything else you wanted to mention regarding Brollywood or any sort of elements of this book that I have not yet tackled or asked you about?
Well, yeah, there's a kind of a marketing campaign that I'm working on at the moment, and it's called the Brollywood World Tour.
Okay.
What I'm doing is I'm sending books out to various different contacts throughout the world in as many different countries as I can get, and I'm getting people to take a picture of the book in like a unique setting, like just to show that where the book is. So I've got friends in kind of North America, friends in Europe, and contacts in Asia and stuff like that. And I'm aiming to get this. So if anybody's listening who wants to take part who happens to be in a country that is not the UK, because I've got the UK covered because I live here.
Yeah.
You want to be part of the Brollywood World Tour? Then let me know, because I will send you a copy of the book out, and you can take a picture of it in whichever country you happen to be in. And I'm trying to get it into as many countries as I can. I've got it in there's a few kind of bookshops who've agreed to have it and take a picture of it in their bookshops and stuff like that. I've got a bookshop in Mexico, and a couple of bookshops in Italy and Czech Republic and all these different places. So I'm going to have a whole sort of gallery on my website and call it the Brollywood World Tour. I'm going to put it on social media as well. But
that is amazing.
The aim of it is to have like a permanent fixture on my website, is have this page of all these pictures of Brollywood in all these different countries, and it's a fun project. This one, yeah,
it's clever. Isn't it?
I hope it comes off. I'm relying on I'm relying on two things. I'm relying on the goodwill of the people who I've been in touch with, and I'm relying on the postal service. And so, these two things, can they be trusted? Who knows?
Find out next time. That's amazing.
If all goes well, I'm going to be posting them on social media throughout the month of December, like an advent calendar style thing.
Oh,
so hopefully I'll have enough material to start doing this from the 1st of December onwards. If I haven't, then I'll leave it until next year. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see.
We'll have to let me know, because although I do follow you on the social media places, and I will ask you to plug your social media handles in a moment, and I'll include links in the description. But if you let me know, because obviously I do not get notifications because I've turned them off for every single person I know posting on social media, or my phone would be a block. But if you do end up doing that, let me know. I'd like to, look at them and also share a few of them, because that's a really, really cool idea. It's great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well then, so obviously I highly recommend everyone checks out Brollywood, as well as Everything I Am and Getting Away with It. And for some reason, I don't know why it keeps coming up, but The 100. We haven't spoken about that book in years, but
it's a good book. Yes,
good. And definitely recommend it to anyone to listen to. It's you can, with all of the prior books, obviously this was released serialized on Ragbag Presents, but the other books, you can find them on Bandcamp, and they name your own price as well, if anyone is a bit skint, but obviously you can pay for a physical copy, I think, of all of them.
Yeah. They're all available as real books.
Yeah. I knew the Ragbag ones well, but I was like 100. I was like, I'm pretty sure it is, or I didn't want to say the 100. And then you go, I ran out. It's like, okay, no, but that's good. So physical copies you can get. You can listen to the audio versions of them as well, either on Bandcamp or on the Ragbag Presents feed. I'll include links to the various ones there as well in the description. Obviously, I listen to audio because I love hearing Frank do the various voices, and hearing the author of your own works put the right inflections on certain parts. And because you are an audio, I was going to say audiophile, but that's someone who listens to a lot of audio things, but you're a person on the audio frontier of releasing lots of great audio content.
I like that. So, I like the sound of that. Yeah. Speaking of I like the sound, I have a podcast called I Like the Sound. Listen to that as well.
Yeah, and if you need an excuse to hear even more of my voice, I've appeared on 2 of the episodes, haven't I? Is it?
No, more than that, I think, yeah.
It's more than 2, because I remember series 1. Oh, yeah, there was 2 in series 1, and then it was the first one of series 2, I believe.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. I lose track of
Well, I did as well, because you messaged me and you're this one's come out, and I was like, I was like, I remember recording a batch of them, and then I remember a couple of them weren't specifically used, but I was like, I couldn't remember if they were on the cutting room floor or what. I took no offense, and they're like, oh no, it's coming out in a future one. I was like, okay, and then I occasionally do collaborations, and then I don't hear anything for months, and someone's like, oh, by the way, that episode you re-recorded a year ago, it's coming out now. So, oh yes, I've forgotten completely about that. So I'll make sure to include a link to that as well. And then it is on Twitter, it's at Ragbag Presents, is that right?
Yep. Yes, it is. And it's also, that's the handle on Instagram as well. It's the same one.
Absolutely perfect. No worries. Is there anything else you want to tell the lovely listeners? Oh, and obviously not on top with David Ivar, either of Herman Dune as well, which link to that will be in the description. Lots of links, because Frank is a busy person and does a lot of stuff. He podcasts more than I do, and writes books, and also records essentially an audio drama as well, and just has friendships with frontmen of bands as well. So busy guy. Is there anything else you wish to tell the lovely audience before we end this call?
No, I think I've plugged everything. I haven't said what my website is, because I'm kind of adding more things to that. It's frankburton.co.uk. So I'm trying to make that the best website in the world. So I'm just adding loads of different things. And actually, one of the things that I've added on there, this is quite a good thing to mention, is that as an introduction to the Ragbag series, I've written a page on there. It's called Ragbag Explained, and it tells you exactly what Ragbag is, because it's quite a complicated thing to explain. It started as a podcast, it became a series of novels. And it's also kind of these offshoot things like the Frank and Claude Are Following You show, and all of these different like threads that are part of the same kind of universe. So Ragbag, if you're wondering, if you've been listening to this conversation and you still haven't figured out what Ragbag is, there's a page on my website that explains it all. Yeah.
Brilliant. And there's also the bonus show, which is Ragbag Rambler as well, which you can only find on your website.
That's fun. Yeah, that's the video series. Yeah, check that out. That's nice.
don't know if you have time for it, and you've got a family as well and kids and everything. It's just like you are an incredible individual, a very passionate, very driven, and I love listening to your wide variety of audio content. That's why I love having you on the show and chatting with you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, it's always nice to come on.
Well, thank you. And it's always good to see you in person because we've done it twice now. So I'm sure we'll do it another time. I'm sure I'll be able to go up to Manchester at some point as well and just say hi and have a coffee again because that was lovely. But thank you so much for coming on the show, Frank. As I said, it's always delightful chatting with you. It's always so fun having an excuse to listen to your audiobooks and things, or your books on audio. And I really look forward to next year so you're going to be doing the Claude and Frank. That's like a mini series thing, but you're also going to be releasing the fourth version of the Ragbag book. Is that correct?
Yeah. Be doing both of those things in 2023, all being well.
All right then. Well, either we'll chat again in 2023, and we'll do both of those, or maybe we'll do 2 podcasts next year, one for each one, because we'll have to. We'll see when they come out. Because it's just if you release them in short succession, I'll probably do one podcast. But if you almost have one in the first half of the year, one in the second half of the year, I could probably do that. So I'd love to chat with you about those things, and I'll listen to Herman Dune a bit more and have some thoughts on them because I'd not listened to them before. Awesome. Well, yeah, just thanks again, Frank. It's always great fun. I know my listeners always like talking to you. One or two of my Patreon supporters, I was talking to them about something, and one of them messaged me. He was like, "Oh, I heard you doing another podcast with Frank. I always like your conversation with him." So it's the audience likes you too.
Nice. Oh, yeah. Shout out to that guy.
Thanks, Tony.